Good morning. We're back reading. Today's book is going to be called Karma by Sadhguru. And we're just going to dive right in there. Chapter 1 Karma, the Eternal Enigma. Sutra number 1. Karma is about becoming the source of one's own creation. In shifting responsibility from heaven to oneself, one becomes the very maker of one's destiny. In the driver's seat. It happened. Once the Pope went to the United States, his schedule was a busy one, with engagements in various cities. One day, he happened to be in Louisiana in a chauffeur-driven stretch limo, the vehicle that demonstrates the quintessentially American ability to stretch the limousine to its limits. The Pope was excited because he had never driven in a car like this. He told the chauffeur, "I would like to drive." How could the chauffeur refuse the Pope? He said, "Of course, your Holy Father." So the Pope took the wheel and the chauffeur took the back seat. The Pope started enjoying the car and his foot got heavy on the gas pedal. He hit 90 and then 100 miles an hour. He did not realize how fast he was going. Now, the Louisiana police, known to be sticklers when it comes to speed breaking, swung into action. When the Pope and the zooming limo saw the flashing lights behind him, he pulled over onto the shoulder of the road. The cop got out and carefully with his hand on his gun slowly approached the car. He looked in. He saw it was the Pope himself driving. He peered into the back seat and saw somebody else sitting there. "Wait," he said. He went back to his car, took out the radio, and called the police chief. He said, "Captain, I've got a real big fish." "Oh, come on. Who is it? Bonnie and Clyde?" "No, somebody much bigger than that." "Sweet Jesus, have you got Al Capone?" "Oh no, somebody much, much bigger." "What, you think you've got the President of the United States himself?" "No, somebody far bigger than that." "Oh, come on. Who the hell can be bigger than the President of the United States? What have you got your hands on?" The cop replied, "I don't know, but he's got the Pope as his chauffeur." And that brings us to the crux of this matter. Most people don't have a clue who's driving their car. Look around you. Ask yourself how many people you know are living with any real understanding of the crazy locomotive called life. Most people are passive pawns in the ride, clueless about their machinery works, the source of octane, how to manage its direction or its velocity, or, above all, who their chauffeur is. They talk of free will, liberty, and independence, but they have little or no control over their lives. Their destiny is something that they create unconsciously. Welcome to karma, a dimension that puts you squarely back where you belong, where you were meant to belong all along, in the driver's seat. Demystifying karma. With what we come to central question of this book, what is karma? Literally, the word means action. Unfortunately, most people have understood action in the terms of good and bad deeds. They see karma as a balance sheet of merits and demerits, virtues and sins, a life audit of sorts. To others, it is a ledger maintained by some divine chartered accountant who assigns some people to the celestial bliss and co-signs others to another world or into the maw of some recycling machine that spews them back into this world to suffer some more. That is merely false and absurd. It is tragic. The notion has created generations of puzzled and fearful human beings who use the term indiscriminately without a clue of what it means. It has spawned a brand of fatalism that has paralyzed vast segments of people and has been used to validate social injustices and political tyrannies of various kinds. It has also led to much spurious philosophizing and empty academic debate and has, of course, boosted the fortune-telling industry. Let us shatter the first myth. In actual fact, karma has nothing to do with reward and punishment. It has nothing to do with some despotic life auditor up in the sky, working with primitive devices of carrot and stick. It has nothing to do with the benign God of up in the heavens. Nothing to do with the divine retribution. Nothing to do with virtue and sin, good and evil, God and Mr. Lucifer. Karma simply means we have created the blueprint for our lives. It means we are the makers of our own fate. When we say, "This is my karma," we are actually saying, "I am responsible for my life." Karma is about becoming the source of one's own creation and shifting responsibility from heaven to oneself. One becomes the very maker of one's destiny. Karma is the natural basis of all existence. It is not a law that is imposed from above. It does not allow us to outsource our responsibility anywhere else. It does not allow us to blame our parents, our teachers, our countries, our politicians, our gods, or fates. It makes each one of us squarely responsible for our own destinies and, above all, the nature of our experiences of life. So, the only relevant question here is, are you ready for your karma? Are you ready to hear about a dimension that is so empowering that it tells you that you are fully capable of taking the reins of your own life into your own hands? If not, read no further. If you are willing, and if you are curious to find out more about how this mechanism works, this book could be your key. All you need to do after this is fire up your engine and set off on your new life journey. Once you're at the wheel, your experience of the ride will never be the same again. It is important to remember one thing, however. Karma is not a doctrine. You do not get any brownie points for subscribing to it. You do not get any negative marks of disbelieving it. Karma is not a creed, a scripture, an ideology, a philosophy, or a theory. It is simply the way things are. It is an existential mechanism, like the sun. It operates whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you pay it obstinance to it or ignore it. It is not looking for a fan club. It simply turns you from a white-knuckled, terror-struck passenger in the back seat into a confident driver in charge of the wheel, joyfully navigating the course of your own destiny. The karmic cycle. To turn driver instead of passenger, however, you need to start by knowing a few basic rules about how the karmic mechanism works. Let us start by addressing the fundamental misunderstanding. Although karma means action, it does not necessarily refer to physical deeds. It does not necessarily refer to what you do out in the outside world, whether it be acts of charity or acts of villainy. Instead, karma is the action. Karma is action on three levels: body, mind, and energy. Whatever you do on these three levels leaves a certain residue or imprint upon you. Now, what does this mean? It is quite simple. Your five senses are collecting data from the outside world every moment of your life. You are literally being bombarded with stimuli at every instant. Over time, this enormous volume of sense impressions begins to assume a certain distinctive pattern within you. This pattern slowly shapes itself into behavioral tendencies. A cluster of tendencies hardened over time into what you call your personality, or what you claim to be your true nature. It works in reverse as well. Your mind shapes the way you experience the world around you. This becomes your karma, an orientation to life that you have created for yourself in relative unawareness. You are not aware of how these tendencies develop. But what you consider to be myself is just an accumulation of habits, predispositions, and tendencies you have acquired over time without being conscious of the process. Take a simple example. Some people may have been joyful children, but are now unhappy adults. There may have been life events that triggered that unhappiness, but in most cases, people have no clue how and when they acquired this persona. If they had created their personality consciously, they would have crafted themselves quite differently. But somewhere along the way, by following the diktats of their unexamined reactions and tendencies, chronic unhappiness became their defining characteristic. In other words, karma is like old software that you have written for yourself unconsciously. And of course, you're updating it on a daily basis. Depending on the type of physical, mental, and energetic actions you perform, you write your software. Once that software is written, your whole system functions accordingly. Based on the information from the past, certain memory patterns keep recurring. Now your life turns habitual, repetitive, and cyclical. Over time, you become ensnared by your patterns. Like so many people, you probably don't know why certain situations keep recurring in your inner and outer life. This is because these patterns are unconscious. As time goes on, you turn into a puppet of your own accumulated past. The lives of many people, for instance, are dominated by food or substance abuse. Chemical addiction certainly plays a role here, but the primary problem is that they have set up a recurrent pattern in their life. However hard they try to emerge from it, they keep falling back into the trap. If one does not consciously rewrite one's karmic software, the regulatory of the pattern can feel like it is being imposed from without, rather rather than initiated from within. But this software is not a fate to be endured. It can be rewritten, dropped, or distanced, as we will see later in this book. The karmic mechanism is ceaseless, for every mental fluctuation in you creates a chemical reaction, which then proceeds to provoke a physical sensation. This sensation, in turn, reinforces the chemical reaction, which strengthens the mental fluctuation. Over time, your chemistry is determined by a series of unconscious reactions to sensory and mental stimuli. Now, if you simply think about something that excites you, you can actually feel certain sensations in your body. This can be empirically verified. We know that human being is a psychosomatic organism, that whatever happens in the mind immediately imprints itself on the body as a chemical process. If you think of mountains, for instance, your chemistry will react in one way. If you think of tigers, it reacts in another. For every minute mental fluctuation, there is a certain type of chemical reaction and sensation. You may not even be aware of it unless the sensations become acute. These sensations register over time becomes the blueprint of your unconscious mind. You are therefore living a repository of karmic memory on levels you are not aware of. Today, research has shown that psychological and emotional traumas can contribute to your risk of mental and physical health problems. We are told that mental distress can lead to cardiac problems. None of this is new. People always knew that if you go through psychological upheavals, your heart will break. All this happens because your body chemistry changes over a period of time, as a result, constant mental and emotional fluctuation. This is a vicious cycle. If you touch the firmament of your mind just once, the resulting ripples are enough to keep going for a lifetime. The mind is a process that picks up the momentum without any assistance from you. You may have noticed that when you were 18, you were generally able to shrug off difficulties and move on. The ability was more challenged by 30. By 45, many things seemed to bother you. And by 60, you find it almost impossible to pick yourself up, adapt, and move on. This mentality is pervasive. You can see it all around you. At 18, people are often anxious about their future. At 70, when most of their life is behind them, they are still worried. They have become such veterans at the business that they worry for no reason at all. This is because the cycle from mental fluctuation to chemical reaction to sensation, which then in turn produces a chemical reaction that leads again to a mental fluctuation, has gathered momentum. Over time, this is a cumulative impact on the cellular and genetic memory as well as on the energy system. The unconscious mind is therefore a tremendous library of karmic memory. You would find this information very useful if you were approaching it consciously. The problem is that it manifests all the time without your permission. You feel like one big mess because you are punching your psychological keyboard randomly all the time. Think of a CD on which music is recorded. The disc is like your body, whether physical, mental, or energetic. The music is analogous to the impression recorded upon your body. Now the music is just a small impression on a compact disc. When you play the CD, you do not experience the disc, you experience the music. Karma is similar. You are not actively experiencing your energetic or mental or physical body. You are only facing the music, and you cannot stop it. You are experiencing your karmic impressions and imprints all the time, and you cannot bring these to a halt. The tedium tyranny of karma. The level at which compulsiveness of karma operates may surprise you. When you walk into the auditorium or conference room, the seat you choose may seem like a decision you made freely, but often on a karmic compulsive is but often a level of karmic compulsion is involved. If you attend the same conference or class for the next 5 days, you may notice that you are likely to sit in the same place each day. Many years ago, when I was training teachers to impart my inner engineering program in different places, the new trainee teachers would often ask Sadhguru, what kind of questions are students likely to ask? What can we expect, and how do we deal with it? So I made a chart for them of the arrangements of the class and told them, see if a person comes and settles down here, this is the kind of question they are going to ask. If a participant settles down there, this is what they are going to ask. Now, of course, there were exceptions. A latecomer might choose a place based on the only seat that is available, but 90% of the time it happened exactly the way I said it would. That is how predictable karma is. So karma is not some external system of crime and punishment. It is an internal cycle generated by you. These patterns are not oppressing you from without, but from within. Externally, it may be a new day. You may have a new job, a new home, a new life partner, a new baby. You may even be in a new country, but internally you are experiencing the same cycles, the same internal oscillations, the same behavioral shifts, the same mental reactions, and the same psychological tendencies. Everything has changed except for your experience. You keep modifying the outer environment, but nothing will work because you haven't figured out how to change your karma. Something else seems to be pushing your buttons. Someone else seems to be driving your car. For every other creature on this planet, the struggles are essentially physical. If they eat well, they are just fine. But human beings are different. For humans, when the stomach is empty, there is only one problem. But when the stomach is full, there are 100 other problems. You may talk freedom, but you are gold plating your limitations all the time in absolute unawareness. Even as you extol the values of independence, everything about you, not just the way you look or feel or think, but even the way you sit or stand or walk, is determined by your past patterns. Do not forget that in addition to being unconscious and compulsive, karma is also deeply cyclical. Karmic information within your system is encoded in different kinds of cycles. The largest cycle is the solar cycle because everything, animate and inanimate, in the solar system is deeply influenced by our sun. Our planet is no exception. The solar cycle is a period of 4,356 days, nearly 12 years. Someone who lives according to the solar cycle leads a life of great health, well-being, alignment, and minimal friction. As the length of the karmic cycle decreases, life becomes progressively more unbalanced. If your life runs in 3 or 6 month cycles, you are in a serious state of psychological imbalance. There are the same inner upheavals or life situations will keep recurring every few months. If your life is determined by a 28-day cycle, the lunar cycle, which also is the shortest one, you could well be considered deranged or psychotic. The word luni, as you know, is linked to the word lunar, and this is no coincidence. It should be remembered, however, that karmic cycle that it should be remembered the karmic cycle has nothing to do with the reproductive cycles of the female body. Now, if we do not break these internal or external patterns, nothing will ever happen. You might have noticed that the more successful you become, the more frustrated you get, because somewhere unconsciously you sense that you are simply not going, as you are simply going around in circles. You may have learned to ride the cycle, but you are not free from it. With yogic practices, the aspiration is to move toward the solar cycle so your balance and stability is assured. You may not be able to change your past action and the mental emotional karma you've accumulated, but you no longer slide into short spin cycles. You no longer wear your karma as a skin tight garment. You learn to wear it loosely. You hold it at a distance. The problem is that people do not realize how tenacious karma is. You can meet with an accident and die, but your karma is not destroyed. You can break your head and blow all your brains out, but the karma continues. This is how resilient, how relentless, how subtle the karmic mechanism is, and that is why freedom from this cycle so often seems like such a remote possibility. The yogic tradition tells us that in addition to the physical body, each human has each human being has a mental body and an energy body. There are subtler bodies as well as known as the etheric body and the bliss body, but the accumulation of karma essentially happens on the levels of the first three bodies: physical, mental, and energetic. Therefore, even if you break your body and mind, your life energy continues to bear the karmic imprint, like a computer hard disk. The backup systems are so efficient that even if you lose the body or your mind, you still do not lose your karma. However, it does not matter what volumes of karma you have. The moment you start stepping into the subtler dimensions of the etheric and bliss bodies, your karma cannot touch you. The law of cause and effect can operate only on the physical, mental, and energy levels. Beyond that, it has no impact. The moment you begin to taste the divine, as it were, your karma has no hold over you. There was a time when human beings wrote on stone tablets. From stone tablets we moved to leaves. And then we came to books. From books we moved to cassettes and CDs. We have now come to the age of microchip. We could use what could be stored on a million stone tablets as encrypted in the tiniest speck imaginable. It won't be long before technology finds a way to start recording information on pure energy itself. This may not yet have manifested in modern technology, but eventually it will happen. I say this not out of any technological knowledge, but because I know how the inner mechanism works, and the atomic and the cosmic, the individual and the universal mirror each other on every level. Right now, the same electricity that powers your light bulb becomes light. The same electricity that powers your air conditioner becomes the air cool, makes the air cool. The same electricity that powers a microphone becomes amplified sound. This is not because the electricity is intelligent. It is simply the mechanism of the appliance. But a day will come when we have smart electricity. We will be able to load memory onto energy of electricity directly so the very electric stream can come with an intent. It will have the information to behave in specific ways to make certain decisions. Maybe one day is still, maybe the day is still far away, but I have no doubt we are heading there. When I initiate groups of people into a spiritual process, each person's energy behave differently depending upon their karmic information. Though the same process is offered to everybody, each person's energy response depends upon the type of karma they carry. The energy body responds accordingly to the kind of software imprinted upon it. This is why when two people's response to initiation is never the same. In short, karma operates on so many different planes, you cannot shake it off with physical illness or accident, dementia, psychosis, or death. You will notice that even those who are mentally ill do not behave similarly. The karmic structure may be out of control, but it still governs the way they behave. Unless you loosen the grip of karma, there is no way out. This is the deadly tedium and tyranny of the karmic rut. This is also why people have, from time immemorable, sought something more, even though they do not know what it is. This condition has been given many names, from existential discontent to ennui to simple anxiety and unease. It is the sense of not living at full throttle, not understanding its purpose, its beginning or its end, its direction or the source of its propulsion. It is the age-old human resentment of powerlessness, of limitation. The smell of bondage. As we have seen, whatever you do with your body, mind, or energy leaves a certain imprint. These imprints configure themselves into tendencies. These tendencies have been traditionally described in India by a wonderfully apt word, vasana. Literally, vasana means smell. This smell is generated by a vast accumulation of impressions caused by your physical, mental, emotional, and energy actions. Depending upon the type of smell you emit, you attract the certain kinds of life situations to yourself. Think of a flower. The flower has a certain kind of vasana. It is the fragrance that draws certain kinds of life to it. It cannot move and it has no volition, but because of its fragrance, it may be chosen for worship in a temple sanctum. In fact, thanks to its vasana, it gains entry where few human beings are permitted. It is not so different for human beings. Here, the word "smell" does not simply imply odor. There is no judgment attached to the word. It simply means that if you exude a particular kind of vasana, existence will ensure you land up in a certain places at certain times. If you exude another type of vasana, existence will make sure you land up in certain other places. So what moves towards you and also moves away from you is determined by the smell that emanates from you. Your vasana depends, of course, entirely upon the kind of residual memory or karmic content you carry. This works in subtle ways. You may not be aware of it, but in wakefulness and sleep, you are performing karma. A simple thought pattern, a simple thought pattern could make you function in specific ways. If you start, if you keep thinking about the move, I'm sorry, if you keep thinking about the movies, or perhaps a particular movie star, for instance, you are very likely to see a particular person in a crowd who shares your passion. You might miss the others, those who love books or meditation or something else. If you see 1,000 faces before you, your vasana is likely to draw you towards someone who's similarly inclined. It happened. At a certain point as a teenager, I got myself a huge cobra, a marvelous 12-foot long specimen. It had made its way into a local tube-like factory, and I caught it, much to the relief of the factory workers. I hid it under my bed in a large glass container. Somehow, one day, it managed to escape. When my father heard a loud hiss from my room, he went down on his knees to find what the matter was. When he saw the cobra, he absolutely freaked out, ran out of the room and crying, "Cobra, cobra." When I entered the scene, everyone at home was literally standing on chairs and sofa. On the other hand, I ran into the room to protect my snake, anxious that my companion would be thrown out. My parents' vasana produced aversion. My vasana produced attraction. I managed to smuggle the same snake back and housed it later on the rooftop of my home in a large cage. For another occasion, it managed to escape again. I happened to be out at the time. As I came riding back on my bicycle, I saw my parents standing outside the house, consternation written large upon their faces. The school adjacent to the house had just a four let up at 4 in the afternoon. A huge crowd gathered around the snake. Everyone was terrified. As I drew close, I realized what was going on. I knew I could not go home. There would be too much drama. I simply zoomed by, scooped up my cobra by the middle with one hand, and rode away. This story exemplifies vasanas at work. What provoked terror from my parents and others produced a very different response in me. I have never felt any aversion to snakes. My sense of kinship with them is an ancient vasana that I carry. I have always been comfortable around these exotic creatures. Ever since childhood, I have been able to intuitively track their presence in the wild. If if I simply followed my sense of smell, I would know under exactly which rock the could be found. I developed quite a reputation in my neighborhood as a snake catcher. There are many reasons for my attraction to snakes. The connection between yogis and snakes is an odd one, Both exude a vasana that draws them to each other. The snake is an incredibly perceptive creature and is instinctively drawn to higher levels of energy. This is why Adiyogi, Shiva, the first yogi, is always depicted in traditional iconography with a snake around his throat. In all those cultures in which people have delved into existential perception, the snake plays a pivotal role. The traditional veneration of snakes, cows, and crows in India is based on the awareness that these creatures represent an advanced stage of existential development. Since yogis constantly aspire to enhance their perception, the snake is an important presence in the yogic tradition. The cobra is revered as the only creature that can perceive the subtle and etheric dimension, even in daytime. Not surprisingly, it plays a significant role in several creation myths even even if it has sometimes been disparaged by those who fear its capabilities. Yet another reason for this vasana is the connection between the snake and the kundalini, the coiled energy that lies at the base of the human spine, which yoga consciously harness for spiritual development. The Kundalini energy has been described as serpent energy because of its similarity to the snake in terms of a shared pattern of movement and stillness. In the early days of my work as a guru, when I wanted to concentrate a powerful energy form called the Dhyana Linga, I needed to draw very fierce and intense disciples around me to assist with this project. Now that this mission is complete, I have altered my vasana completely. Because the need for the kind of concentrated energy work is over, I draw other kinds of people to me. I am probably unrecognizable to the people who knew me then, because I am a different person. Depending on the nature of the work, I adjust the tone of my vasana. This may be puzzling to some, but this is the way every spiritual master operates. However, the capacity to adjust one's vasana is not an option reserved only for the spiritual adept. It is possible for each individual to choose not to be a victim of the vasana to a great extent. All it takes is a certain awareness. With a little awareness, every human being can begin to transform habit into choice, compulsion into consciousness. It is important to see whatever seems determined in your life has been determined by you unconsciously. You have written your own software. Depending on the way you have written your software, that is the way you think, that is the way you feel, that is the way you act, and that is the way you invite into your life. Depending on what kind of fragrance you emit, you attract life situations. Some people seem to constantly attract pleasant situations. Others seem to constantly attract unpleasant ones. Or perhaps you see this in different phases of your life. In some phases, wonderful things seem to keep happening. In others, adverse circumstances keep recurring. Now, this simply depends on what you have in your karmic reservoir. Today, you have rotten fish, so you attract some terrible situations. Tomorrow, you may have flowers, so you attract better situations. One thing that we are trying to change through yoga, and hopefully this book, is the kind of fragrance you throw out into the world. Many people talk about freedom, but they secretly fear it. They feel secure in bondage. Other people opt for bondage because identification with an ideology, a religion, a relationship, or even a gadget enhances their identity in some way. Consider something as simple as your cell phone. If it is used to enhance activity, it can be a source of empowerment. But if it is used to enhance identity, it becomes a source of bondage. In this way, people acquire vasanas unconsciously, often believing they are choosing freedom when they are actually choosing enslavement. It happened some years ago when conducting a yoga program in southern India. I stayed in a village called, oh God, Velayudhampalam. My lodging was opposite a hill. I was told that the Jain monks had lived and meditated in these hill caves more than 1900 years ago. The iniquity piqued my interest because it meant these monks had lived only a few centuries after the great Jain teacher and Guru Madhavrya. One afternoon, I climbed up with a few volunteers to a beautiful cave located like a bird's perch in the rocks. The inside was filthy, strewn with bottles and graffiti. In India, every second rock and monument has the initials of tourists visiting lovers scrawled upon it. These caves were no different. They were liberally scratched with the central KTP loves SRM type of stuff. So we cleaned the place up. Now there were rough indentations in the rock floor, which clearly served as beds for the monks. I sat down on one of these beds. I suddenly found my body beginning to pulsate powerfully. Intrigued, I decided to spend the night there. It was at night. It was a night of revelation. I realized that the subtle body of the monk who had been there centuries ago was still incredibly alive. I could tell, for instance, that he had no left leg. It had been amputated just below the knee. Now these monks led quiet, isolated lives, had done nothing of consequence in the outside world, but they had left behind such a profound imprint that I could tell everything about their lives and spiritual practices. The great rulers of those times are more or less forgotten. The richest folk and the most learned men and women of these times are erased from our memory. But these simple monks are alive, are as alive today as they were 1900 years ago. Their stories are available to those who are receptive, and they are capable of inspiring us to this very day. This is the nature of the right kind of inner energy at work. It is imperishable. Every individual's energy carries a certain fragrance. The physical body falls back to earth, however. The residue of each one of our thoughts, actions, and above all, our energy lingers on. The imprint that can last for a millennia after a lifetime. The more conscious the energy work, the more enduring it is. It is up to us to decide the nature of our bequest to the planet. This is what the anonymous Jain monks of the Vilayud Hamplayan did. Aware that every action has a consequence, they choose to live consciously. As a result, they achieved a certain kind of immortality that the rich and powerful in the history of the world have seldom managed to attain.